We're back, baby.
This is not our first.
This is our first podcast.
This is not
Ever.
our first.
It feels like it.
Not our first outbreak podcast. We had one before.
We did have one. We had one like a month and a half ago. Lots changed in the last. Actually, not much has changed at all, man. Feels good to be back here. We've been talking for a little bit. We're in New York. It's empty. We're in recording on the 9th floor of our WeWork, and it's completely empty here. We don't even have an office on the 9th floor.
Yeah.
We have an office on the 10th floor.
It feels like we have a whole office building.
Yeah. Basically, we do. It's empty, and it's all here for us, except there's nothing here. So it feels like we're playing a real-life version of The Last of Us. But it's pretty crazy outside. There's not a lot of people. There's lots of crazy people walking around because there's cops have better things to do right now.
I think the last time I was here, it wasn't boarded up. So this is my first time seeing a bunch of the city all boarded up, which is
pretty weird, right?
Yeah.
That was actually the weirdest thing for me. Like when people were walking around and stuff was fine, but then when the protest started and like Bleecker Street got boarded up, that was crazy because it just felt like seeing the shop owners like right downstairs from your apartment was like, yeah, it was just weird.
Huh.
Did they board up anything by you?
Oh, no.
Oh, really?
No, everything is business as usual.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Not really, though. I mean, like, stores aren't open.
No, I mean, we live in, like, pretty neighborhoody area. So, like, the grocery store has been open the whole time. Yeah, I guess the restaurants aren't. Yeah. They're not open.
The restaurants in my neighborhood started opening. Seating on the sidewalk. It's pretty nice, actually. Kind of romantic at night. Like, they have the lights out and stuff. And, like, every restaurant is just seating, like, in the street, basically.
That's pretty cool.
On like West 4th Street. It's pretty cool. It's actually pretty good advertising.
Yeah, and for your neighborhood, that like must be an amazing experience.
Yeah.
To like eat outside.
Yeah, exactly.
What are they going to do when it gets cold?
Have to go back inside, I guess. Yeah, man. What are we talking about today? I just shot a video this morning. I got my little pillow right here. I'm just trying to get comfortable. You know, we're trying.
Did you bring
booth.
that with you?
No, it was right here. I wonder if it's covered in COVID.
Yeah.
I shot a video this morning, and I added auth to a backend that we're working on. So we're working on a new backend because eventually front-end developer is going to backend no matter what. This is like close. We're like close, aren't we? I'm trying to think if we would do this if we had an interview. I think it would be too intimate, like too close, too intense. Like Rich Harris, you know,
right,
what are you working on? It's like you said. It's like the sportscaster thing. You have to be like, no one cares about your problems, Kyrie. Like no one cares, you know. Just shut up and.
I think you'd rather see people close together. There's some like shows where they have like two couches that are on opposite sides of the room, and it looks so unnatural. Yeah, or like a desk and a couch. I'm
wondering how some of the YouTubers I've been watching do it because this feels like it feels very different from when we normally podcast, doesn't it? Like
it does, but when you're watching it on video, you won't be able to tell.
Interesting. So, anyways, this morning we have a part of the Mirage website that we want to add a backend to so that you can like create Mirage sandboxes and share them with people. Right now you can share them via URL because we just wanted something working earlier on. But we were talking about adding a backend. So I was experimenting last night, got something working and shot a video this morning. Should be out on YouTube by the time this podcast goes up. But I created a Hasura from scratch too. It's pretty cool. Created a Hasura app. Got the React app talking to it using Urkel query library. Mm-hmm. And
when you say create a Hasura app, what does that mean?
Basically go to Hasura. So Hasura just changed because they have a cloud offering now. So if you go to like the homepage of Hasura, it's like all trying to get you to try their cloud thing. And it's like $99 a month, I think, which is pretty high for their intro plan.
Oh, you can sign up for this?
Yeah.
Dude, $99 a month is high.
To replace your whole half your engineering team.
Yeah. I can basically go on vacation now.
It would be nice to try it like Heroku style. one dyno or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it all does, but it's like hosted Hasura.
Okay, but that's what you set up.
No.
Oh, okay,
No.
Okay.
Oh, maybe I should though.
Yeah, that's where I thought you were going.
Oh, interesting.
By the way, I didn't even know there was a cloud.
I think they just came out with it like a couple weeks ago, and I originally didn't know if there was a self sign up, but I think there is now. Like I think you literally click a button on the homepage and you're taken to a form. And you can start to create an account.
Oh, cool.
And log in.
So what did you do? You set up
I set up Heroku.
Okay,
app.
gotcha. Okay, and that's what you've done before.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So you find the thing that says like do it for free, open source, set it up yourself basically, and you click on it, and they take you to like the second page of the open source guides, which is showing you Docker instructions, and I'm like, my browser tab closes without me even doing anything once I see that. But then before it closes automatically, you see the thing on the left that says deploy to Heroku, and I'm like, that's the only thing I want to see.
Can I just point out that like before Docker, it was so much worse.
Oh my god,
it was so much worse. So the fact that you're like, I don't want to do Docker,
the word Docker is just Kubernetes. I just can't. I don't even finish the sentence. I don't even finish the word. But no, there's a big button. That's what they should do. Like it's like these people are not that good at product. Sorry, they're just not. They're going to get better, I hope, but they should find people to help them because they have an incredible tool, but it's not a good product right now because it's not focused on the user story. The way Netlify is. Like Netlify's capabilities are immense. But when you click on functions first, they are walking you through the intro user story. That's what Hasura needs to work on. Anyways, if you find the Heroku button, then you just click it. You just click the button, big purple Heroku button, and that's all. You don't need to read all the crap around it. You just click the button. It brings you Heroku, and you just click create app, and it deploys Hasura to a Heroku app.
Cool. Did you set up a database with?
It adds on automatically. It comes as an add-on. It's literally like one click from the Hasura docs brings you to the pre-configured setup for the new app in Heroku that already has Postgres add-on. You choose which team you want it to be on. You push a button, and it's all done.
Did you upgrade our database? Or did you use a free one?
I used a free one.
No.
Wait, we can change it, right?
We're just going to have to upgrade. Yeah.
It's just work. This is the kind of thing that cloud does for you, you'd imagine?
No, I think the Heroku, when you upgrade from a free plan to a paid plan, the upgrade isn't that good. So you end up like downloading the free database.
Oh,
you end up stopping writes, downloading the free database.
Oh, but if we could change it before we need any data.
Yeah, I guess we haven't gone live yet. Yeah. So we'll do that.
Cool. That's good to know. But is that the kind of thing that like Hasura Cloud would do for you, to imagine?
I think, I mean,
that's what you were excited about it originally, right? Like the idea of not having our own Heroku app, like upgrading databases and stuff like that.
So like the whole idea behind Hasura is you have like database tables and then GraphQL that maps to those database tables. But when we're deploying to Heroku, like this is going to sound weird, but we actually have database tables. Like we have a Postgres instance and that we need to maintain.
That's our concern.
Right. So I'm hoping with like a cloud thing, we don't even, like Postgres would just be an implementation detail in that case. And we don't own it. We don't think about it.
Like Firebase kind of.
Yeah. And to be fair, Heroku does an amazing job at running your Postgres instance, securing it.
Yeah, like how hard is it to upgrade? It's like, I have to go to this dashboard in Heroku and push a button or whatever.
Right. So it's not like we have to write init scripts or anything like that. Yeah. But
it still works. No, I have an old Heroku app that is like going to be end of life in a couple months, and I have to decide what to do.
Don't worry. They never actually.
They have a big red banner.
I've had that for years.
It's my reminders app that I wrote with Nate like 4 years ago in Rails, and we still use it. It sends us emails all the time.
Nice.
Like, we have like call my mom every week or whatever, and I get it, and it's like manage your reminders. That thing's still chugging along, man. We wrote that in like a day and a half, and it's been working for years. It's pretty cool, code, pretty cool. But anyway, so you do that, and then you're brought right into graphical, and it's like you have no tables, so you click tables, and I created a sandboxes table with an ID, and they have like pre-configured ID, created that, updated that, and then I added a config as a text. And then you go back to graphical and you can start doing it. You're like, this is awesome. And so the GraphQL query.
And there's no Postgres at this point, right? Like you're just in like PHP MyAdmin style. That's cool.
You're in the Hasura interface, which is like 4 tabs, one of which is graphical, one of which is like a PHP MyAdmin for like modifying rows, inserting rows, creating tables, setting permissions, and then there's some other stuff. But you do that, and then back to React, install Urkel, make the same request, boom, it works, awesome. But it's unsecured. So then you have this thing on your Hasura dashboard that says secure your environment because it's like admin. So basically, by default, there's only an admin role, and the admin has all full privileges to do everything.
And whether you're logged in or not, you just have
exactly. Actually, from GraphQL, the graphical, the IDE thing, when you're making requests, you can set the headers, and you just see that it's cool. Like, I don't even know. I think the header is just. I don't even know what the header is before you've secured it. It might not even be anything because Hasura is running in this mode, which is like all requests are admin and there's no auth at all.
That's a pretty good onboarding story because if you had to like set up a user,
totally, it's great, it's perfect. So then you click secure my thing, and it says, okay, you have a couple ways to secure it, and the way we do it on Heroku is to set this environment variable called, Hasura admin secret. So you set that. You just go to Heroku and you go to settings and you reveal environment variables. You set that. You click on activity. Heroku's like, it was set. You don't have to like redeploy it or anything.
Yeah, I don't even know Heroku's amazing.
I don't even know what's happening there. What is happening there?
I think they restart the dyno, but they don't redeploy the app.
That's awesome.
To get the env variable in. But it's so seamless.
It's so good. So then you go and if you like refresh your admin, now it's auth. So you see a login thing and you just paste in the password you just set as the environment variable. So now your graphical request tab has a header that it's sending, because in graphical you can choose your headers like in the UI as well. And you just say X Hasura admin secret. And so that is just by default wired up. So when you're in Hasura logged in, you're like acting as an admin. But now you go back to the React app and like you refresh and it doesn't work anymore. You get an error back that says either I need X Hasura admin secret or like X user role header. And I don't have either of those things. So it's pretty cool. It's like, it's kind of like error driven development, right? Yeah. So it's like, that's how the video is going to be in it. And so it's like, okay, so now we need to auth this user. So we don't want this user to just be another admin. That's the whole point of this.
And if it was, you wouldn't admit it on a podcast.
Right, so. Exactly. But you could at this point give the key to the Mirage app, the Gatsby site, and it could act as an admin. But you wouldn't want to do that.
You wouldn't want to deploy that because then everyone would be an admin.
Yeah, but originally I was thinking you wouldn't want to do that because so that's better than the case where it's unsecure because anyone could make a request. No, but it would get leaked, of course. Yeah, I was just working through that. So even if you can hide environment variables, but it's going to be in a request. So it would get leaked.
Right. It needs to be in the header.
Yeah,
exactly. Since the header comes from the client.
I was just trying to think though, how do you set an environment variable? So are all environment variables unsecure that end up in the React app?
Yes. Yeah, because they run client side.
Wait, but how does that work with like API keys for like setting up? I knew this. I go through this like every time. Auth is always a thing that I just get confused on.
Yeah, so usually there's like a public and private key, something like that. That's what like Stripe does. So your back end has a different key from your front end. And if your front end key got leaked, like it's okay that it gets leaked. Yeah. It's like your public key.
Yeah.
By the way, there's also like public and private keys from like asymmetric.
Yeah. But
I don't think that's what, especially that's not what like Stripe is doing with these keys. So yeah, your private keys that are set, it's like env variables on your backend apps, like that's hidden.
That makes sense to me.
On the front end, they're visible.
Always.
Yeah.
Yep. But why? I'm just getting confused here. If you were setting up like a S3 bucket and you needed like an Amazon key.
Yep.
you would do that from like, you know how Create React App lets you like
set
environment variables that are prefixed with like env dot react underscore whatever.
Yep.
Oh, that's because those are public.
Those are public keys. So like in the S3 example, your React app can't just, so let's say you have a secure S3 bucket. Mm-hmm. Your React app can't just go talk to S3. Your React app needs to go get a signature from a backend. Yeah. Something that, and that thing, the backend is the thing that has a private key.
Yeah.
They can go off to Amazon and say, give me a signature that's good for 30 minutes.
Then why does the environment variable ever need to end up in the React app? What's the point of an environment variable in the React app?
Environment variables in front-end apps are important because they let you configure the app. So your app can just use a static process.env.api key. Even though that API key is public,
it's public.
It can be set on staging, on production. So that way you don't have to like change code as you deploy to these environments. So that's
or it's like API endpoint that changes environments.
Exactly. I think that's another way to look at it.
Got you. But it's not a secret. It's never a secret.
Correct.
Yeah. Which is why it's prefixed with React underscore to signal to you. It's like, oh, this is going to end up in your client code.
Now there can be like links between keys. Like you can have a public key on the front end, a private key on the back end, like that sort of thing. But I think not even trying to get into that. I think if it's a env variable in your React app, it's public. Clients need all the code to run. So if you were just
creating a new React app and like you wanted to integrate it with Stripe, and you didn't have a backend, like you need a backend if you want it to be secret, basically.
Well, yeah, if you wanted something that was like download all my customers, you would need a backend because you don't want the front end. You don't want a publicly available front end. And now there are people that like you could build a backend. You could build a front end that only you are going to run. Or that's
on your computer,
or like it's behind your VPN.
Okay, yeah.
That's on your computer. That's the best example.
And that would be the equivalent in this case of if this Mirage site was like something that only you and I were using.
Yeah, and we might just hard code that admin.
It's literally
key.
Like a UI for the admin interface of Hasura.
Yep.
But the reason that's okay is because it's the equivalent of us signing in to the admin and the equivalent of us having that secret, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. But if you just wanted to create a front end that was talking to Firebase or that was talking to Stripe, you can't do that in a secure way in just a front end code base.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to get like super like pedantic here, but like Stripe could offer something. Yeah, Stripe could offer something. For the record. wait, I don't get paid. Why am I here? Stripe could offer something that's like, here's a key for your app. It has to be used on this domain. So it's like the JavaScript won't run if the request doesn't like originate from this domain. You could do something like it has access to like create orders, but it can't see all existing orders. So I think there's like different levels. I know with like our Auth0 integration on this app we work on, there's a whole bunch of settings like that where we have to set the domain name and then the API keys. So there is some, they're public keys in the sense that like users download them and use them on their computer. But there is some security behind there. Now it's not like to say that, I treat all these keys as like, I treat them as like once they're in a React app, everyone has them. Yeah. And you could always use curl to like fake, it's fake the host header, fake everything. It's
just
looking
text.
Right. So I'm not relying on something like cores to prevent like the security or the hacking there. So you treat it as like this is client code and they know everything about it. Right.
So it's not about like, a lot of the times the reasons we use environment variables is because we don't want to put keys in our GitHub repository, but that's for security reasons, and that's a different reason.
Yeah, that would be like the main argument for like backend.
Right.
For front end, I would say we use env variables because we want
like polymorphism, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Different configuration across environments.
Cool. Okay, so you got the Gatsby site, and you could give it the. So how would you actually? I'm just kind of thinking through this. Like, if you actually wanted to make the Gatsby site an admin and give it that secret.
I mean, I would like...
You need an API endpoint to provide the key for it.
Or I would just hard code the key. The key doesn't change, right?
But that's the point is that we just made, is that you can't give the admin... you cannot make the Mirage site an admin without it being exposed. And everyone an admin.
And
being able to do all this curl requests and everything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could have an API endpoint that downloads the key and then sets up your GraphQL client-side GraphQL library to use that key without request. But I think you're going to get to like they provide a whole authentication.
Yeah. So basically, I was just trying to think through like the interesting case there, or whatever. But right. So.
And that's how like a lot of the early front end apps I worked on, they did kind of work like that. You would just hit a current user endpoint and it would give back a JSON payload that had things like your API key or whatever.
Yeah, I was just trying to think if you could make the Mirage site an admin consumer without letting other people act like the admin outside of the Mirage app code, but it's the same. It's the same.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Okay, so it just helps me to talk through all this stuff. But basically, we don't want to do that because obviously you don't want to make everyone an admin. Because you don't want people to be deleting sandboxes.
I don't think you need to justify why you don't want to make everyone an admin. I think you just leave it at that. No, but
it's good to think about each step, like why are we doing the thing we're doing?
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing, right? Because like when you first set up a Heroku, a Hasura app, and you can like make queries, like I made my recipes app, and it was just, why would I off this? It all works, and I'm the only one using it.
And then every time you wanted to tweet something, you'd have to hide the URL.
Yeah, exactly. So as long as you're the only one using it, but it doesn't matter what the code is. It's just eventually that's public, and so you want to make a privileged user. So you could imagine. So this is cool because breaking it down like this makes you think through like what is the minimum step at each way. Like you don't need a user account actually. Like that's not the next step from here is to have a user account.
Yeah. Yep.
The next step is to be anonymous, but have a role that is distinct from admin. So you can be anonymous. You can add new roles to your system, and you can basically give it a privileged access, a privileged user role that is anonymous, but has certain privileges, and not others.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good point. Yeah.
So that's the next step. And as we were discussing this week, what we wanted to do is like the scoped down, shaped up version of our next work on Mirage backend. Like, how far can we get with a single anonymous role that has privileged access? So we don't need user management, right? We don't need logins. And turns out you can get pretty far. So basically what you do is, this is the authorization part of it. Authentication is you are who you say you are. And I don't like authorization. I just want to like get rid of that word from my vocabulary and replace it with permissions, because it's much easier to just say auth and permissions, authentication and permissions.
Okay.
Because authorization is like, do I have the authority to do this thing? It's about permissions. Authentication is your badge says Ryan Toronto and it shows your face, and that's you.
Yep.
That's you're authenticated. Now it's like, I need to go to the 10th floor. Oh, do you have a red line on, the red bar that says you got security clearance to go see the FBI on the 10th floor? That's permissions. Do you have the permission to do that? Right. So I hate that the words are basically the same.
Auth, yeah.
Yeah, it's so confusing.
I like that. I like permissions. Okay.
Authentication and permissions. That's a Yehuda Cat special, by the way. So the authentication part, you have multiple ways to authenticate yourself with Hasura. One is a webhook. Another is JWT. We don't want to deal with JWTs here. So webhook is the easiest way to do it. Hasura, you just give it the endpoint, the URL, and every time a request comes in, it hits that endpoint to make sure that you're okay and that you're authenticated.
Yeah, it almost acts as like a reverse proxy in the sense that a request goes to Hasura, and then Hasura
the front end doesn't know that it's doing that.
The Hasura takes all those headers from the client and goes off to, this is like a URL that you supply to Hasura.
Yep.
And it expects a certain like JSON response back or
what? Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And the values of the JSON are the permissions, basically, or the data that Hasura needs. And it has specific things like X Hasura role, and it's like user, X Hasura user ID can be the only one that is needed is X Hasura role. And
well, for our case, for the app that we're building, everyone is just an anonymous user.
Everyone is this user role. We should actually probably call it anonymous user. That would actually be better. That would be better. We should fix that actually.
Okay,
because I like that. That's more clear.
That's how we talk. It's how we would talk about it too.
Yes, and user is way too loaded. And there will be different kinds of users who are identified by an ID once we add that to the system, right? Once we add a login. Right?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to have branching that's like user without an ID. Yeah.
Exactly. But like you said, it forwards the headers. But in this case, again, what's the very simplest step? You don't even need headers.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's all one thing. So you literally have an endpoint that returns 200. It's basically us telling Hasura that everyone who accesses the system, not as an admin, is an anonymous user. And here's what they can do.
So if you provide in graphical, you can provide that admin key in a header.
Yeah, it does it automatically for you.
And then if you do that, Hasura just says, okay, you have the admin key. I don't even need to go to this proxy server.
So from the auth perspective, Hasura is going to first check for the admin key, and that is the trump card. And then only if that's not present will it check for either the JWT or the webhook, whichever you've configured. It'll use that to check if you're auth.
Cool.
Check your auth status. Yeah. So basically that's kind of how you think about it. Like if you log in with an admin, you're an admin. Else every other request ends up coming through as an anonymous user, because once you set up that hook, then every request will go to that thing. And that thing is a function, which we'll talk about in a second, which is always going to return 200 no matter what. And then you can imagine starting to branch that based on the headers, and that's where you can get into more complexity, right? But this is like the very minimum next step. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing that's really cool about this too, it's like you're not the interface for this, either a JWT token or just making this request to a server and expecting to get back a JSON payload. Mm-hmm. Those are pretty easy to integrate with. I know there's a lot of complexity that I'm just paving over, but like that's so much easier than like uploading custom code to Hasura.
So much
like
easier.
Writing like a function to auth a user in a text box, which some auth services want you to do. And then there's this whole question of like, how do I test this? How do I reproduce this?
Totally. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about in this conversation.
Cool.
But you're 100% on. Just kind of curious what we're at. 28. Cool. All systems still firing. Who knows? We're on for the ride now. But so you decide JWT or webhook. You decide webhook. How do you do that? You set a new environment variable. So back to Heroku, back to config section, edit that, set, Hasura auth webhook URL. And once you set that, it just flips that mode. And so now your interface says it's secure, right? It doesn't say you need to secure your environment like my recipes app did for 9 months.
It's funny. So even if your webhook URL always returns a 200 and always says you're authenticated, your app is still secure.
Yes.
It's funny.
Yeah, I know,
no,
right?
But it's true. It's like
interesting.
It's not that your
app
is...
They don't actually need to do that. They could actually make it so like they could layer sugar on this where you don't even need to do that and just say admin is here, else there's a single role that you get to define permissions for, basically unauthenticated. It's basically unauthenticated, right? There's no difference at this point.
But I kind of like that they make you set up the webhook URL because they make you're learning. It's like a progressive learning about the system. It's like, okay, you need a different role that's an admin. Here's how we add roles.
I know, but think about it, dude. Think about it. No,
you're saying from like an onboarding point of view?
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think about starting at the end. Front end first here. Seriously, like, it's literally what is the difference between, this is the question, what's the difference between an unauthenticated request and authenticated request from an anonymous user where literally they're all the same? Is there a difference?
No.
And so is there any reason why Hasura needs to provide a new third state which says you've given me a valid request, but you don't have any auth headers, or
So you're saying Hasura starts out with one role. It's an admin in an unsecured app, and then it transitions to an app that has an admin key.
You basically the first step is not even that. The first step is just unsecured. So like you're not even a role at that point. You're not even authenticated because you're just no one. So you're not an admin, because an admin is like someone who has certain things. But like when you're unsecure, there's like no role. So it starts off with like, I guess Or another way to say, I guess everyone is an admin at that point.
Okay.
Everyone is an admin, which doesn't require any authentication. So there's like you start off with like one role, which is full
everything.
access. Yep. Yeah. Then you create the secret. And if you have the secret, you're an admin, which has the same permissions as before. Or you're not.
I like this though. And
I know, but I'm just saying, if you're not an admin, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to tell Hasura what non-admins
right. So
have permission to do.
Here, I think this is what we're disagreeing on. If you're not an admin, should there be like additional branching logic that like, okay, you can do these other things because you're not an admin, or should Hasura just like draw a line and say, okay, you need to wire into our auth system. Like you need to build a webhook or JWT token. And I kind of, okay, I'm going to...
It's true that if you needed a second role, the fact that you already understand the system is nice, right? Because you already have a webhook set up. And so if you needed a branch based on headers, you could now do that in your
But this is your second... You're saying if you need like a third role.
Or sorry, if you need a second non-admin role, yeah, a third role, yes.
So I kind of like that they draw the line at as soon as you need two roles, you have to go integrate with auth.
But it's no.
And here's why I'm thinking this. I'm now we're actually encoding auth rules permissions into Hasura, so it almost feels like we're getting back to that text area where you paste a function. Like, you know what I mean? We're making Hasura responsible for auth.
Oh, but you do that. Okay, so let's finish walking through, and then we'll come back to this. Yep. I think I'm going to be able to convince you. So you go to Heroku, you set the variable. It flips into webhook auth mode, which means you either provide it with the secret, you're an admin, or every request, it's going to hit your webhook.
Yep. To
know your role. So now the question is, how do we set up this webhook, right? And so our Mirage site is a Gatsby site hosted on Netlify. Netlify has cloud functions. You just write a function. This was like maybe one of my first functions. Maybe I did this one other time, like 6 months ago. People say this about lambdas and just a function and all this stuff. It really is. And it's a lot less scary than I thought, because I always felt like, oh, it's a separate part of my infrastructure. How do I develop and maintain it? It's literally just a function.
I think there's a difference between AWS Lambda and this. I think they have turned it into just a function.
Yeah.
The AWS Lambda stuff. It is just as easy, but it's like all AWS things. Yeah. There's just a lot you have to.
I was expecting more work, and you go to netlify.com. You say my functions are in /functions, and then you do module.exports. That's it. It's like a Mirage route handler, literally.
And it's like you're literally exporting a function.
Yeah, and and then you get push, and then Netlify does a branch build, and it deploys your function, and then you get to use the URL for your branch build /.netlify/functions/auth, which is the name of the file that you created, and now you have a webhook. So that is like the best part of the whole thing. And I was like, this is bonkers. I mean, I was like I was like this like last night. It was crazy. It's awesome.
Isn't it? I just want to kind of take a side note here. Isn't it like we've always had the way to turn functions in like HTTP requests into functions, like even Express at its core, it's like app.get.
Yeah.
You give it a URL and then a function. And it's so like this idea of a URL that maps to a function. It's like you hear about this. Yeah. And you're like, okay, I've always been able to do this, but it's all the other things.
Yeah, man. Oh my gosh.
It's not about the function or the HTTP. It's the deployment. It's
because those are the only things you care about.
Yeah,
the URL and the function, and now that's all you actually get to write.
That's true. So
literally all you write.
With an Express app, you have to set up everything.
Let's talk about that, because it's super interesting. But I want to come back and finish the story. But you're 100% correct there. So you set that up. You come back to Heroku. Now you have the URL. You throw it in the environment variable, and now you reload the Mirage app. The Mirage app makes a request. Doesn't have the admin secret. Hasura is going to hit your new endpoint. and you're responding with a 200 and a JSON payload that says X Hasura role equals user. And so now Hasura is treating this request as if it is from an authenticated user role. And then your Mirage app, your Gatsby site gets a response that says error. User doesn't have access to read sandboxes. You're trying to read sandboxes. So you are a user from the perspective of Hasura, but by default, roles don't have privileges to anything. You have to give them privileges, which is great.
I have a question. Does a role even exist at this point?
No, it doesn't exist.
Okay.
It does know it's a user. It will say it's a user. It's just that when I go to check my permissions tables, there's no user anywhere doing anything, right?
Okay.
So you're not really creating a role. It's not going to say like user doesn't exist. It's just going to say user, I don't find it. It has no access to any tables that I know about. So that's pretty cool, right? Again, like the error-driven development kind of thing. It's like, okay, now we're a user. We're not getting the same error as we were before, which said we had we were unauthenticated. But now we're a user. It's just you don't have permission to do what you're trying to do. Permission denied, right? So then you go back to Hasura. You click on data. You click on tables. You click on sandboxes. You click on permissions. And then you see admin has everything. And you add a new row that says user. And then you say user has access to read. And then you go back to the Mirage site, you refresh, and it works.
It works. Pretty cool.
Then you add a mutation. You try to click share to create a mutation. It doesn't work. It says no mutation root found in the root of the thing. You go back to Hasura. You check the box that says create.
Next to user.
Next to user. You hit save, permissions. You go back, reload, try it, and it works. It's awesome.
Okay.
And now the user can read and create sandboxes. Oh, and when you give them create access, you can check row level privileges and column level privileges. So for reading, you give them access to every row and every column. For writing, you say every row, but only the config. You can't write an ID. You can't write a created at. You can't write an updated at. So if I had set a mutation request that had like an ID specified or a created at specified, try to like spoof the created at of my REPL or whatever, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's like you can create a bank account. You just can't set the balance.
Exactly.
Very cool. Very cool.
So that's all super easy. So at that point, that's the extent of the permissions logic that Hasura owns.
Do you know what I love about this? Is that if we were writing a Rails app,
it's really
cool. We would have written that in Ruby, and it would be I'm making air quotes. It would be easy. We've done this 1,000 times, but we wouldn't move on. We would go and start writing tests for every single thing, and that's the stuff that like actually kills me because I know exactly what the test is going to do. I know it's going to pass.
Dude,
I still have to write all this because if I get it wrong, it's like I lose my job. Even though I'm not getting paid, but
it's the same it's the same for the mutations and for the reads. Like I'm coming back to graphical and clicking new mutation that's like auto finding the schema that has all done for me and copying and pasting it. And I don't have to maintain. I'm not writing controller code. I'm not writing test request specs. I'm not writing tests for any of this code because it's not code. It's not a liability.
Yeah.
In the same way that code that I write is, right?
Yep.
So that's really the point about the code is debt thing that I said, which is it's interesting conversation, right? Like, is this a liability? Like, have you ever worked with systems that are liabilities that are not code before? Of course, you have. Like that crazy.
There could be an exploit in Hasura. It's a liability, right?
But even that's an easy case. Take the hard case where it's like it's working, or some Excel spreadsheet that someone had, or some system that someone had at work that only they know or only you know. It's not code, but it's a liability in the same way that we say code is liability and code is debt. But man, this is like, it's so far from that boundary. Now, of course, like I'm sure there's times where you get so complex and you try to set like the permission stuff we did with Firebase, which is like, all right, this would be better in code. Mm-hmm. But like for this experience, and I'm guessing I'm going to push it and we're going to push it and see how far it goes. It felt like you didn't write any code the whole time. There's code powering this. It's open source code that could have bugs, of course, but I'm not responsible for it in the same way I'm not responsible for getting my Lambda function deployed, right?
Yep.
And so you end up with the app and you're like, damn, I didn't write any code. I don't have to write any tests. And that is incredible.
Yeah.
So that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So that's just awesome. It's just interesting to see now. And like, in a Rails app, DHH talks about this in conference talks. Do you write tests for validates existence of when you use that helper on an attribute? He would argue no, because that's like the feature, the productivity part of the system. That's like a framework API. And could you like not add it to a field that you needed it to have? Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a balance here. And in general, APIs like that, you shouldn't be writing tests for, he would argue, because it's like part of what makes you productive and using the framework and relying on it. And it felt like that for all these things, even the cloud function, which is literally code I'm writing, and yet is so simple. In this case, obviously it's super simple that do I need a test that it's working? No. I mean, it's like you're just writing a function. If I had to deploy it and make sure it was up to date and anything like that, yeah, I would need to maybe test that code, right? But I didn't do any of that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's like an imperative declarative thing here.
Yes.
So the things that are declarative, we tend to say, okay, we don't need to test. So you checking checkboxes in a UI, or you writing like validates presence of email. These are like declarative things, no testing. I think with that cloud function, eventually it's going to get gnarly. We're going to have like admins, regular users, anonymous users. We're going to have privileged users. You can imagine like moderators that have access to other users,
right,
some of other users' data.
Right.
And I can imagine that function getting pretty imperative, being a bunch of if statements and checks. And I think in that case, that's when we would start to introduce a test.
Yep. Good point, for sure. But yeah, that's how it is. And so that is the baby step. And it's like you finish and like, it's kind of like you said, there is a lot of moving parts and there's a lot you have to understand to be able to wire it together. But at the end of the day, it's like 3 services and, really like UI driven and pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the complexity doesn't have to be there, could be way smoothed over as these things get better. And I had this thought that I was so excited by this when I had it working, and I was like, man, this is so awesome. And then I was like, is this Stockholm syndrome again, where like if the Mirage site had been a Rails app, what would it have taken to create sandboxes? It would have been like generate, like just switch over my editor, Rails generate model sandbox, and now I can like do that, right? But it goes back to the point. There's a couple things here, right? First is that it goes back to the point you said, which is like, as soon as I generate that code, dude, it's not even about writing the requests and writing the permission stuff and writing tests for it. Dude, I mean, what's the stuff that's bitten us? It's what library do I use? How is that being maintained? Yeah. Like, give me a break, man. The code we have for doing the auth checks, what is the contract? What is the policy code that we use in our Rails app?
The
Pundit. Popular one, Pundit. It's fine. It works, but there's like there's complexity in the integration with Pundit and our API. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, the integration is us integrating 3 different. We have a JSON API library, Pundit, and then Rails itself that we're integrating, and that's glue code we're writing.
Yes,
it's imperative glue code.
Yes,
and so we write tests for it.
Yes,
and we end up testing. I can't create it as a field, and that
exactly.
Dude, those tests, they destroy you. And the problem with those tests is...
And the code doesn't work sometimes because the library is an open source library as opposed to like a function from a company that you're paying money for and works.
Yeah. Okay. Incentives.
There's like weird bugs that you hit in open source libraries that like are unfinished.
Yep.
And so it's not just about... I'm arguing with myself in my head as I'm doing this, and it's like, oh, if you were in a monolithic system like Rails, you have all this stuff here, but the thing is you don't. And
I think you could make the same argument if you were using and this is not out of the realm of possibility, but you were using a tool in Rails that gave you an interface to create tables and create permissions.
Yeah.
But it was just something you went to like Rail localhost 3000 / set up permissions and clicked a bunch of checkboxes. Then we could talk.
Yes, we could argue the benefits of a monolith. Yeah. But that doesn't exist.
And just our familiar, I mean, it might just be like our familiarity with Rails. We tend to reach for things that we end up gluing together.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of like a natural thing. Yeah, I'm making a controller and it has permission, so I'm going to write specs.
Yeah, exactly. Also, it's not going to get better fast enough, even if you were holding that belief in the monolith world, because like, first of all, just look at like graphical, which is like just focused on the GraphQL case. It's like incredible and it's just going to win, right? And so that's going to keep happening for all the Netlify function side. If Hasura gets a product person, like it's going to be incredible. Like the PHP MyAdmin thing, which is like super ghetto right now, will be like amazing. It's going to be way better than what you could get all out of the box. Like Stripe has a dashboard further, or it's going to be way better than what you can build if you were building like if a framework added like an open source billing system. So again, arguing with myself in my head, and it's like, is a Stockholm syndrome. It's like, I got so excited, but I have like 6 tabs open. I just wired together 3 services just to make a privileged user access to this data that they can create. But, well, first of all, we're writing like a code editor in the browser, so you need JavaScript to begin with. So it's just funny how much that affects your decision, right? But that changes things. And then second, it's like, no, this is the future, and we're in a weird state right now where like Rails 2 or Rails 3 was, where it wasn't as nice, right? But like today, what you can do with Rails or Laravel or whatever, it's like integrated and nice and works together. Like I saw a vision, I saw a future where like once I understood this stuff, I can do this in my sleep now, and it's incredible. And it's, again, no code, no tests, nothing for me to maintain. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like I can't imagine after doing that, I can't imagine like working on, like it's making me tired thinking about going to a job where I'm like writing policy code and writing tests for it when I know there's tools out there that let me like just move the mouse and like click a button and be done and go play video games. So it's like, but I had to learn a lot about how these things work together, because today they're all, and I saw like in 10 years from now how like this could be so streamlined and even easier for people who know even less, right? It's like inexorably moving that direction. But it's like, once you do it, you're like, oh man, this is awesome.
You know, one thing, I guess I should ask you about this. Do you feel good that like you're paying for these individual services versus? I
mean, I'm certainly happy to pay for them.
Yeah, that's why I mean, like you're paying for someone to provide.
Yeah, the reason I'm happy is because, and I didn't feel the same like if we were using Firebase back like a couple years ago or whatever, let's say, is because it's like, it's one thing to pay for something that's like a CMS that you're using, like I'm paying for Contentful. Okay, I'm building a Contentful app, or this podcast I listen to, all these guys use Craft CMS, I'm paying for this thing and like I'm building that. This is different. This is like I'm paying for Stripe, and I'll write Stripe checks all day long for what they give me, but I'm happy because I know the boundary is like code and HTTP requests, and they're not going to tell me how to build my app at all. And I feel the same way with this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like,
by the way, I'm not saying like, oh, you should feel bad because you have to pay for these things. I'm more saying
I'm saying I think part of what makes it feels good, what makes me feel happy to do it, is because the boundaries are right. And I still feel like I'm coding, even though I'm not coding. Yep. I still feel like I'm building an app on my own, even though I'm not. You know what I'm saying? Is that kind of what you mean? Or
kind of, I'm thinking of like the Rails stuff that we've integrated and we've had to wire together.
We've had trouble with,
and
it's
just like open source. Yeah. And then, the developers, they burn out, they move on to something else. And it's this weird feeling of like, okay, now I have to figure out the next best thing. Right. But there's nothing that really prevents that. And I had this thought like, if Hasura has a bunch of checks coming in every month, aren't they just going to keep providing auth?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels good that you're paying for this. And it's also like, well, you could just pay open source developers, but there's no system for that. There's no real marketplace.
There's no contract that you're really, usually when you pay open source, it's like sponsoring for what? It's like,
a feature or whatever.
Buy me a coffee every month.
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't give me any reassurance. We don't have a contract that we're really agreeing to.
Yeah, exactly.
About what I'm getting for this, which
if we're paying Hasura $99 a month, it's very clear what we're going to get.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And obviously, if you've listened to the show, like that's not a strange idea for either of us. Like I'm 100% on in favor of when people talk about money and open source, they talk about a lot of ideas, and I think there's like a lot of confusion around this topic. But I 100% believe that it helps on both sides of the table, on the maintenance side, on the usage side, with the clear expectations about what you're getting. And I'm trying to think, like, if I put ourselves 3 or 4 years ago and consider like paying for some of the tools we were using, if there was a clear contract there, it's just I don't know. I think I'm getting tired. And like I have like 4 different things going on in my head right now, and I can't form a sentence. But I think the way the payment helps, as in addition to like the contract that is forming these expectations, is like keeping all these services focused on what's core and important, which is why this experience works, and why, like, on the open source side, scope creep is an issue, maintenance is an issue, and like that's why it sucks to get like a year into a project or 6 months into something, and they didn't think how this works with this. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. There's like this boundaries thing that made me feel so much better about this than gluing together libraries. Like both open source things like Hasura or any Zeit product or Netlify functions can have bugs and have missing features, as well as like these 3 libraries you're gluing together to do auth and permissions and like persistence. But like these things are not, because these things are just open source libraries, like a lot of times they're not considering how they play with the ecosystem in the same way that these are. Like if you start Hasura business that's giving you GraphQL endpoints and people are paying you money for it, you need to provide escape hatches for like everything. And it just feels like the boundaries are really good. And it's like, again, I'm kind of arguing myself in my head, which is that there's like a lot of cost. I know I'm kind of being incoherent in this episode, but there's like a lot of cost in the integration. We always talk about that. But there's something about this architecture that feels way better for me. If we had to switch out like our GraphQL API, it actually is like not that scary, because like all of the mutations and queries that our Gatsby site need are like there. And there's like a very direct path to go from our database data in Postgres to those endpoints. So you can imagine like swapping that out. You could even imagine swapping out the auth thing. Like the auth thing is just a webhook that returns this thing. And eventually it might return like 3 different kinds of user roles. Mm-hmm. If we had to move our site from Netlify to Zeit to Vercel and switch that from a Netlify function to a Next.js API route, that's like totally achievable and easy to do, because the boundaries are crystal clear. Think about trying to rip out, what's the name of that library, the auth library for Rails? Pundit, and replace it with something. How much of our code does that affect?
Yeah, a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
It would be super hard. Mm-hmm. It would be a ton of work. It'd be a lot of coding, which is like the hardest kind of, it's like programming is like super complex. We've built up abstractions around it and intermingled things. And there's like bad coupling, just because that's what happens when you code anything.
It's what you do.
It's what you do. It's what we do. That's for sure. And then you have all these tests that you have to figure out how to test things well. And so the idea of switching out these things is like insane. But then you run this risk that one part of your puzzle, it goes unmaintained, or there's a better way to do it, and you're screwed. So it feels really bad, and it feels risky to me, like to go in on a system like that architecture, even though I'm so sympathetic to the DHH argument about monoliths being good, right? Because you cannot ignore like the maintenance thing. And maybe we're being biased from our past or whatever. We've been bit a few times by libraries we've used, but like, no, it happens, right? And so like this new world feels very different. It feels very, very different to be able to swap these pieces. And that's not, even though like the immediate response is like, that's Yagni, you're premature, but it's not really, right? It's not.
It's not.
Because it happens.
As you're telling the story, the thing that pops in my head, like, if the service only took you 30 minutes to set up,
exactly,
how long can it take you to switch?
Exactly. That's the other aspect of this, which is like, okay, you stop and I just finished and you're sitting here looking at these 6 tabs I have open, and I have this thing talking to this thing, and I have this thing over here. And it's like 3 parts, right? There's like 3 moving parts. And it's like, oh, if I was in a Rails app, I would have just like, let me run Rails generate model.
You don't have to think about the boundaries. You can just reach into any code you want.
But the thing is, if this one I take a week of upfront learning, and then once I understand it, I press 4 buttons in an interface and I'm done. And the question is, from a long-term perspective, what is the burden? What's the risk? Whereas over here, I've built up years of knowledge and experience such that I can run a generator and give you an endpoint for this thing. But like, what is the risk profile there? And what happens over time there? What happens is like you write more and more code, and you form this coupling with these dependencies that have maintenance problems.
You accumulate more debt.
And it doesn't feel the same in this world. It just feels very different.
Now, just to push back here, in the world of services, we haven't gone 5 years of gluing services together. And I'm sure we will find a way to create,
bad coupling
exactly.
and maintenance risk where, like, in Hasura, you have these like permissions things. And like, how you were saying, like our cloud function grows and it has like these branching. It could actually not grow. It could stay super declarative and have like 3 things. And you do the logic in Hasura. So in Hasura, you can say every time and this probably what it will end up being is something like a user or actual logged in user tries to edit a sandbox, you have to run a check that says that the sandbox has a user ID equal to the X Hasura user ID header, right?
Yep.
And you can do that, and that one will be easy. That's not that,
and you can do that on like super declarative.
Yep. But you can imagine it getting
super declarative is more declarative than regular declarative. You gotta just so you know,
everything. What is the Animal Farm version of that? All Hasura code is declarative. Some code is more declarative than others. Jared Palmer was tweeting about this, and he was lamenting platform as a service like Hasura because he was at a point where he just wanted to be writing code for his policy logic, his permissions logic. And he was saying it was too hard and you can't test it and stuff like that. So I know that you can get there. I'm not trying to say that this is a silver bullet, but there is something nice about the boundaries where if you royally screw up the permission stuff here, but we're using Stripe for billing, like it doesn't, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or we're using like the Hasura, like core code for like the dumb data layer. It doesn't spill in. Whereas like you look at some of our code bases and you're just like, they're screwed, like they're effed. Like you can't, like you might as well, that's why you just throw it away because like you could have great parts, but like for you to have great parts that have clean boundaries with the problem libraries that you chose, that's like impossible. That's like very difficult to do that well. Even if you're a talented programmer, like you're a responsible programmer on a team, like for those things to not intermingle, right, is really tough because code tends to it's hard to do that. That's like, and also a lot of those libraries are made to integrate tightly when you're in the monolithic environment because that's where all the productivity gains come from in the first place. Like part of the argument of using a monolithic environment is like, you're not worrying about the integration. So like these things, so like code from a gem should just auto register and provide itself, and you don't have to like do all this stuff. It's like the magic aspect of it,
right.
Which is a good in that it saves you the integration complexity, but bad because it can create bad coupling and tie you into a bad spot when one of those libraries goes in a bad spot, you know?
It'll be really interesting to see eventually we're going to use a service and that service is going to
not do what we want
or not be profitable, be shut down. There's some that we're going to get in that bad coupling, and it'll just be interesting to see what the path there is like. The thing I really like about this story you're telling though, is that the setup it's easy.
Yes.
And it's just because it's like UI driven, because it's service driven, it tends to be more declarative.
Yeah.
And
less about my code that I wrote last night. And now you have to understand. It's like for me to explain it to you, I can show you a video. If I can show you a video that teaches you how it works, like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then you can literally do what I did last night. Whereas with code, it's never going to be the same code that I wrote. It's going to always be different because of, you know what I'm saying? Code is so complex.
I wonder how much, I mean, this is can of worms. I wonder, like, is this, are we only having this conversation because we're writing SPAs? Like, if we were writing a Rails app through and through, like, would we just gem install, devise, and, you know, have controllers, have some templates? There's less, I guess I'm thinking out loud as I say this. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, I guess, like, both apps are making HTTP requests. So
yeah.
Is this, okay, here's another. Is the need for these services more because Rails doesn't provide these things? Like, Rails does not provide tight GraphQL integration, and we have to go off and wire that in.
Yeah. I don't know. But the premise here, though, I mean, is that we're working on something that is like that needs a lot of JavaScript interaction, I guess.
Yeah.
You're just saying if you were working on another kind of app?
Yeah. If you were working on an app that could be all tightly integrated in Rails, and have to go outside of Rails, other than like a few gems.
Yeah.
Is the story less compelling in any way? Like, you just
wouldn't even care. Yeah. I mean, I think it's compelling if you've worked on an app and been bitten by, it's not even just being bitten by libraries that go unmaintained or have gaps in them. It's like your knowledge.
Oh, I mean, it's just
gets stale and old, and you forget what you did, and
you like domain model something incorrectly.
Yeah.
Maybe because the business requirements changed, but that's also because it's just some things are hard to domain model and you make mistakes.
Yeah. And of course I can hear someone like screaming at the podcast right now saying like, oh, you get to use Hasura now and you don't have to model your domain anymore. Of course.
Okay, yeah.
You have to model your domain. It's more like, what are you actually able to eliminate from the coding side of it, because you're using these like declarative coding APIs frees you from a lot of messy imperative code that is hard to write well. This is like the next step, which is like, oh, what if you don't need all the flexibility of a programming language when you're just writing CRUD endpoints? And we can eliminate an entire category of bugs and logic that you have to understand and write, because you only need a very extremely limited subset of that functionality for this part of your app.
You know, it's interesting. Okay, so in the Hasura world, we're going to write imperative code. We're just going to come into instances where we have to do it. And those are instances where we'd probably also do it in the Rails world. But it would be good to look for spots where in Rails we would have reached for imperative code. Yeah. But we're
well, that's all the policy stuff and the CRUD resourceful stuff. I mean, all the controller code, right? That is like the standard controller code, basically. And if it's declarative in our Rails app, but it relies on libraries that are writing the imperative code, you still win in the Hasura world, because like the main story.
Okay.
The main story, and like it's just more official. It's like it's you want there's
a force boundary.
Yeah, exactly. It's the boundaries, and it's the power. What's the Tom Dale thing that he always talks about? It's the rule of least power. So that's why it feels good, especially at this early stage in a project where I literally just need to. Yeah, it feels like you're using the rule of least power here, where I need a sandboxes database table. I need to be able to CRUD it using this GraphQL query and mutate it. And I want to be able to create a sandbox, but only pass in the config. It's like, right? It's like, again, you need escape hatches eventually, but when the thing you're doing to solve the 80% or 90% case is as least powerful as possible, it feels a lot better. And this feels less powerful than coding does, certainly, which is a good thing by the rule of least power, right? Mm-hmm. So that's like, it's like ultimately you want something that is like smoothly moves down that, right? You start up here. It's just like a good API, right? Good APIs are like very high level and constrained, and you can escape them when you need to, but only when you need to. And so 80% of the time, if you're doing things that can be taken care of by the high level APIs, you do that. And in coding, you have to be A, using a good library that gives you that, and B, be disciplined to do it, and C, understand the intent of the library author in order to use it correctly in order to achieve that. Whereas like if you're using a good product, I feel like, again, the boundary almost forces you to do it.
The discipline's a really good point here because, in the Rails, you have to be disciplined to. You can write a declarative controller in Rails.
Yeah.
I mean, you really can.
Yeah.
But you have to be disciplined too.
Yeah.
The UI, the Hasura app,
forces
that. Yeah. I mean, they can only expose a checkbox.
Yeah. And you can only add an ID that's like a primary thing or whatever, right? It's like Rails nudges you towards those things, but like Hasura literally enforces it in a lot of cases. Yeah, it's just less powerful, which is what you want.
That's great. That's the way to think about it. That unlocks something for me because there's a lot of Rails apps I've worked on where we've slacked off and we've kind of, maybe been a little relaxed and we got a bunch of imperative code. And that when you say like apps you want to abandon or apps that are hard, those are the apps that come to mind. So
nice.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool, man. Well, I think I'm like time trialing right now because I've just been not getting good sleep and working way too much. Bad habits. I did go grocery shopping. We mentioned that last week, I think. But unfortunately, it did not serve me as well as it has in the past. I did do some cooking, but I also did some eating out. But going to Florida tomorrow and going to try to take Independence Day off and this weekend off and not work. So I'm excited about that.
Nice.
You do anything for Independence Day?
Nope. We'll probably barbecue inside.
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah. By that, I mean, like, I don't know, hot dogs on the stove, something like that.
You can do a lot with a cast iron.
Yeah.
I've done some good grilled chicken during this here quarantine in my little 550 square foot apartment. It's pretty impressive. You got to turn the microwave fan on all the way, the kitchen fan on, and keep the pillow ready to just get the smoke alarm.
Yeah, there you go.
So your neighbors don't yell at you. But you can do it. Noise canceling headphones are good for that because everything is like, and you're like, I hate cooking. And then you put those things in, like listen to a podcast. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
All this crazy oil is splattering everywhere. Cast iron skillet, that was great. Cool. All right. Everyone, thank you for listening. I'll have a link to that video next week. Hopefully by the time this is out, you should be able to find a video. I'm guessing it'll end up being about half an hour of me walking through the actual Hasura Firebase auth setup that I just explained. We still never got back to that original thing we were going to circle to, which is Hasura really should give you the ability to create permissions without having to go through the hoop of setting up a webhook, but we'll simmer on that and maybe answer it in the next one. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
See ya.
Bye.